The legend is back. At 0600 hours on a crisp morning at Kingsley Field Air National Guard Base, Oregon, the thunderous roar of General Electric F-110 engines shattered the silence as something unexpected took to American skies. Fighter jets that were supposed to belong to history books were now carrying the future of US air superiority on their wings. Russia and China didn't see this coming. Neither did most defense analysts. Boeing had just revolutionized air combat with an aircraft everyone thought was obsolete. And what happened next left the Pentagon's critics stunned. The F-15 Eagle first took flight in 1972, establishing itself as the premier air superiority fighter of the Cold War. With an unmatched combat record of 104 kills and 0 losses in air-to-air combat, the platform proved its dominance across 4 decades of operations. Before we understand what shocked the defense establishment, we need to grasp the crisis facing the US Air Force. The termination of the F-22 Raptor program years ago left America with only 187 fifth-generation air superiority fighters. News of potential F-22 retirement by the 2030s created panic. Meanwhile, the F-35 Lightning II program spiraled into astronomical costs that threatened to consume the entire modernization budget. Here's the problem. The existing fleet of F-15C and F-15D Eagles, some 3 decades old, are still protecting American airspace right now. Russia replaced their Su-27 flankers long ago with advanced Su-35S and Su-30SM variants. China deployed hundreds of J-16s and J-20 stealth fighters. America seemed caught flat-footed, gambling everything on the F-35 becoming the jack of all trades to replace almost every aging aircraft across the combined armed forces. The budget numbers told a brutal story. There was simply no way to tick all the boxes and maintain the Air Force fleet long-term. Something had to give. And that's when Boeing saw an opportunity nobody else believed was possible. The F-15 Eagle first took flight in 1972, establishing itself as the premier air superiority fighter of the Cold War. With an unmatched combat record of 104 kills and 0 losses in air-to-air combat, the platform proved its dominance across 4 decades of operations. During the 1990s, Boeing developed what became the right modification at the right time, the F-15E Strike Eagle. This multi-role variant transformed the air superiority fighter into something far more versatile. Based on a 2-seater configuration, engineers added conformal fuel tanks, or CFTs, along the fuselage for extended range without sacrificing hardpoints. New Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW2229 engines delivered 29,000 pounds of thrust each. Most critically, the aircraft gained ground attack capabilities that made it lethal in both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. The F-15E became the backbone of every major US Air Force operation throughout the past 3 decades. It proved invaluable in Desert Storm, Operation Allied Force, Iraqi Freedom, and Inherent Resolve. But as stealth technology matured and 5th-generation jets emerged that could shoot beyond visual range without even looking at the enemy, the original C and D air superiority variants started becoming obsolete. Boeing proposed a bold solution around 2009, the F-15SE Silent Eagle. This stealth variant featured internal weapons bays, radar-absorbent coatings, and canted vertical stabilizers to reduce radar cross-section. The project attracted international interest, but ultimately wasn't selected for production. However, the idea planted a seed. The Eagle platform had more to offer. It just wasn't the right time yet. By 2001, the last F-15 rolled off the production line for the US Air Force. Most analysts assumed that was the end of the Eagle's story. But here's the critical factor that changed everything. International customers kept the production line alive. Export orders flowed in from Israel, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan. These nations not only bought aircraft, but funded continuous upgrades to engines, avionics, radar systems, and weapons integration. The production line remained active throughout the next 2 decades. The airframe evolved constantly, with paying customers overseas driving modernization. engineers never stopped working on the platform. When the Air Force's budget crisis reached critical mass around 2018, Boeing had a fully modern, combat-proven solution sitting ready. The project could be resurrected. All the pieces were in place. Before we continue with what makes this aircraft revolutionary, if military technology fascinates you, type SHIELD in the comments and hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The F-15EX, designated Eagle Neuf, looks at first glance like a strike eagle with updated branding. That surface-level assessment couldn't be more wrong. Once you examine what's under the skin, this aircraft represents a generational leap in capability. Boeing based the EX on the latest export variant, the F-15QA, destined for Qatar. This version incorporated decades of international customer-funded improvements. The CFTs remain, providing extended range without external fuel tanks. But the propulsion system received a major overhaul. Out went the Pratt & Whitney engines. In came slightly more powerful General Electric F-110 GE 1 in 29 engines, producing 29,500 pounds of thrust each. You can spot these immediately by the distinctive turkey feather exhaust nozzles unique to the GE power plants. Visual changes extend to the horizontal stabilizers, now the same size across the aircraft, instead of the varied configuration on earlier models. 2 bumps appear near the cockpit on current EX variants, but these house components from the Qatar configuration. On US aircraft, they're literally empty spaces, quirks of converting an export design back for domestic use. The National Guard originally requested a single-seat configuration for their squadrons. Boeing had to deny this request because the single-seat production line closed long ago. Reopening it would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Boeing's solution showed creative problem-solving. They redesigned the flight controls so one pilot can operate the entire aircraft without anyone in the back seat. The weapons system officer station remains, but it's optional. Here's where the revolution truly begins. The most significant internal upgrade is the fly-by-wire flight control system. Previous F-15 variants used analog mechanical controls with limited computer assistance. The EX employs full digital fly-by-wire, which unlocked something extraordinary: 2 additional weapon stations under the wings. Earlier variants couldn't use these hardpoints because the weight and drag created instability that made flying nearly impossible with analog controls. Computer systems now compensate instantly, managing the aerodynamics so pilots never notice. These 2 extra hardpoints matter more than they might seem. Combined with the existing stations, the F-15EX can carry an insane payload capacity of 29,500 pounds of ordnance. That's more than any other fighter aircraft currently in service anywhere in the world. The aircraft transforms into what pilots call a spam can carrier, capable of hauling enormous quantities of missiles and bombs into contested environments. The radar system received a complete overhaul. Engineers combined the advanced processor from the FA-18E Super Hornet's APG-79 radar with a new, larger antenna optimized for the F-15's nose. This hybrid system delivers threat detection ranges exceeding 400 kilometers against fighter-sized targets. But detection is only half the story. The radar operates simultaneously in scan and jam modes, meaning it can track enemy aircraft while also disrupting their radar systems and communications. Previous generation systems had to choose one or the other. Some advanced sensors present on the latest export variants for Qatar and Saudi Arabia aren't installed on the EX at this time. The Legion Pod infrared search and track system, for example, gives export customers a capability the US version currently lacks. However, Air Force officials indicated these systems might be integrated later down the line as upgrades become available and budgets allow. At this point, skeptics ask the obvious question. With such a huge radar cross-section in the stealth era, and with the F-35 already in production, what was even the point of all this development work? The aircraft can't hide. It shows up on enemy radar like a beacon. Why invest billions into a non-stealthy platform when America already fields 5th-generation jets? The answer reveals a strategic reality the Air Force finally confronted. Let me explain why this matters more than stealth. While Boeing pitched the F-15EX, defense planners were watching a crisis unfold in slow motion. The next-generation air dominance fighter, designed to replace the F-22 Raptor, remained stuck in development. Current projections showed the aircraft entering service during the 2030s, with full operational capability and serial production sometime after that, possibly in the 2040s. Meanwhile, the threat wasn't waiting. Russian and Chinese aerospace engineers observed American fighter procurement with intense interest. They noted the F-22 production termination in 2011 at just 187 aircraft. They tracked F-35 cost overruns and technical problems that delayed full combat capability for years. Most importantly, they recognized a gaping vulnerability in U.S. force structure. At the moment the F-15X program launched, not a single dedicated air superiority fighter remained in active production for the United States Air Force. The F-35 Lightning II is an exceptional multi-role aircraft, but it leans heavily toward ground attack missions similar to the F-16 Fighting Falcon's primary role. With a relatively small internal weapons bay limited to 4 AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles in stealth configuration, the F-35 isn't optimized for countering heavy enemy fighters in defensive scenarios. Russia deployed approximately 100 Su-35S Flanker E aircraft, each carrying up to 14 air-to-air missiles with ranges exceeding 200 kilometers. The Su-57 Felon entered limited service, though in smaller numbers than originally planned. China fielded hundreds of J-16 multi-role fighters and advanced J-20 stealth aircraft. Both nations developed long-range missiles specifically designed to target support aircraft like tankers, airborne early warning planes, and cargo aircraft that enable U.S. power projection. The strategic calculation became brutal in its simplicity. In a major conflict, adversaries would launch massive alpha strikes designed to overwhelm defensive combat air patrols. Dozens of fighters carrying hundreds of missiles would attempt to break through and destroy the high-value assets that make American air power function. The F-35, with 4 internal missiles, would run out of ammunition after engaging 4 targets. Then what? Defense analysts wargamed various scenarios. The results weren't encouraging. In contested airspace over Taiwan, the Korean Peninsula, or Eastern Europe, the limited magazine depth of F-35s created vulnerabilities that adversaries could exploit. Reloading required returning to base, leaving gaps in coverage. Carrying external weapons sacrificed stealth, eliminating the F-35's primary advantage. This is where the F-15EX changed the tactical calculus completely. With 12 AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, plus 4 AIM-9X Sidewinders in a standard air superiority loadout, a single Eagle II could engage 16 separate targets before Winchester. 4 F-15EX aircraft on combat air patrol could engage 64 enemy fighters or cruise missiles. That's the defensive depth the Air Force desperately needed. The payload capacity enabled something else that shocked observers: hypersonic weapons integration. The AGM-183A air-launched rapid response weapon, currently in development, measures 20 feet long and weighs approximately 6,000 pounds. The F-35 cannot carry it internally, and external carriage creates significant drag and performance penalties. The F-15EX, however, can haul 2 of these hypersonic missiles under the wings while still carrying a full defensive load of air-to-air missiles. Adversary intelligence services tracking U.S. fighter procurement initially dismissed the F-15EX as a budget-saving measure. They assumed America was cutting corners, buying obsolete aircraft because the F-35 cost too much. This assessment proved fundamentally wrong. The Eagle II wasn't a compromise. It was a purpose-built capability, designed for specific mission sets where it actually outperformed 5th-generation aircraft. Subscribe now, because what comes next reveals the economic calculation that made this possible and why it might actually save American air power. What defense planners discovered changed the entire modernization strategy. The revelation wasn't about performance specifications or combat capabilities. It was about something more fundamental: sustainability. Money makes military power possible, and the numbers told a story that couldn't be ignored. Although the F-15EX unit cost isn't dramatically cheaper than the F-35, approximately $87 million versus $78 million per aircraft, the operational economics diverge dramatically. Flight hour costs for the F-35A run approximately $36,000 per hour. The F-15EX costs roughly $27,000 per flight hour. Based on the similar F-15E Strike Eagle's operational costs, here's what that means in practice. If the Air Force had purchased F-35s instead of F-15EX aircraft, they wouldn't be able to operate the entire fleet simultaneously. Budget constraints would force some percentage of aircraft to remain grounded simply because flying them would consume resources needed for maintenance, spare parts, and personnel. The Air Force would own more fighters, but be able to employ fewer of them at any given moment. Maintenance requirements revealed another critical factor. F-35 low observable coatings require intensive upkeep, with stealth-certified maintenance facilities and specialized personnel. Every few hundred flight hours, the aircraft needs depot-level maintenance to restore radar-absorbent materials. The F-15EX requires none of this. Maintenance personnel already know the platform intimately from decades of experience. The learning curve is minimal. Parts commonality with existing F-15E Strike Eagles further reduces logistics costs. Then Boeing revealed the projected lifespan, 20,000 flight hours. This figure is absolutely insane when compared to other fighters. The original F-15AB models were designed for 4,000 hours. The CD variants pushed that to 8,000 hours. The F-15E Strike Eagle achieved 12,000 to 16,000 hours through structural improvements. The EX doubles the best previous variant. At typical operational tempos of 250 to 300 flight hours per year, a 20,000-hour airframe would serve for 66 to 80 years. Obviously, no aircraft will remain in service that long due to technological obsolescence. But the structural integrity means these aircraft won't age out during their service life. The Air Force won't face another block obsolescence crisis in 15 years, like they're experiencing now with CD models. The Eagle de Feru could easily serve from the 2020s through the 2060s if needed. This longevity would make the F-15EX the longest-serving military aircraft platform in United States Air Force history, surpassing even the B-52 Stratofortress in terms of individual airframe lifespan. The strategic bomber achieves its longevity through low utilization rates. The F-15EX will accumulate hours at fighter-typical rates and still exceed half a century of service. Defense officials also considered the mission profile reality. In uncontested airspace conducting ground attack missions against insurgent targets or supporting friendly ground forces, flying $150 million F-35 with $36,000 per hour costs represents massive overkill. The F-15EX performs these missions far more cost-effectively. Stealth provides zero benefit when fighting adversaries without integrated air defenses. Using the appropriate tool for each mission maximizes the total force effectiveness. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when planners examined the Air National Guard mission. Guard squadrons primarily defend domestic airspace, intercept unidentified aircraft, and respond to potential threats over North America. These missions occur in friendly airspace with complete sensor coverage, refueling support, and ground control. Stealth is irrelevant. What matters is speed, altitude, sensor range, weapons capacity, and reliability. The F-15X excels at all of these requirements. Guard pilots would receive an aircraft superior to what they flew before. Optimized perfectly for homeland defense missions. The Air Force initially ordered 144 F-15EX airframes with an option for 200 total. This quantity would replace the entire F-15CD fleet, one for one, filling the immediate capability gap. But discussions emerged almost immediately about expanding the program significantly. Industry sources reported talks about ordering an additional 200 aircraft, pushing the total to 400 Eagles. That number shocked analysts. 400 F-15X aircraft would represent a massive investment in a fourth-generation plus platform in the stealth era. It would make the Eagle the most numerous fighter in the US Air Force inventory for decades to come. The implications ripple across the entire force structure. First, the F-35 program would shift focus. Instead of being forced into every role imaginable, the Lightning II could concentrate on missions where stealth actually matters, penetrating integrated air defense systems, striking high-value targets in contested environments, and conducting intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions over denied territory. The F-15X would handle the magazine-depth air superiority mission, homeland defense, and cost-effective strike missions in permissive environments. Second, the next-generation air dominance program faces less pressure to deliver massive quantities quickly. With the F-15EX filling the air superiority gap through the 2030s and beyond, NGAD can be developed properly without budget-driven compromises. The Air Force can afford to wait for a truly revolutionary sixth-generation design instead of rushing something into service. Third, allied nations are watching closely. Countries that can't afford or don't need fifth-generation stealth fighters now have a proven alternative. Boeing already secured export orders for advanced F-15 variants from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and others. The EX configuration, with its modern systems and extended lifespan, becomes even more attractive. Israel reportedly expressed interest in upgrading their F-15I fleet with EX technology. Japan might pursue similar upgrades for their F-15J fleet. The production schedule shows deliveries beginning in 2021, with the first operational squadron achieving initial operating capability in 2023. Full production runs through the late 2020s for the initial 144-200 aircraft order. If the expanded 400 aircraft buy materializes, production would extend into the 2030s, keeping the St. Louis Boeing facility running for another decade. Strategic competitors must now adjust their planning. The Russian and Chinese assumptions about exploiting limited US magazine depth in defensive scenarios no longer hold. An adversary planning an alpha strike against a carrier strike group or air expeditionary wing must now account for defensive combat air patrols carrying 16 missiles per aircraft instead of 4. The mathematical calculus of saturation attacks changes dramatically. Industry implications matter too. Boeing's fighter division secured a stable production program extending years into the future. Jobs remain. Engineering expertise stays sharp. The infrastructure to design, test, and manufacture advanced fighters persists in the industrial base. When NGAD eventually enters production, that expertise transfers directly. The exact details of certain classified capabilities remain unknown. Some sensors and electronic warfare systems installed on the F-15EX carry high-security classifications. Their specific performance parameters aren't disclosed publicly. However, Air Force officials indicated the aircraft can operate effectively in high-end contested environments when employed properly with supporting assets like EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft and F-35s providing targeting information. Critics argued that buying non-stealthy fighters in 2020 represented backward thinking. They claimed the Air Force was clinging to outdated doctrine instead of embracing the future. This criticism misunderstands modern air combat. Stealth is a tool, not an absolute requirement. Different missions require different capabilities. The F-15EX fills roles where its advantages outweigh its lack of low observability. Combined with stealthy platforms in integrated packages, the Eagle II makes the total force more capable than any single aircraft type could achieve alone. Budget analysts projected the total program cost at approximately $12 to $15 billion for 144 aircraft, including development, production, and initial support systems. That represents a fraction of what an equivalent number of F-35s would cost when accounting for life cycle expenses. The Air Force gains hundreds of additional fighters within existing budget constraints. That's not compromise, that's smart resource allocation. The legend is back, and the strategic implications reach far beyond replacing aging C and D models. Boeing revolutionized air combat not through radical new technology, but by recognizing that the future sometimes requires learning from the past. The F-15EX proves that stealth isn't everything, that magazine depth matters, and that combat-proven designs with modern systems can outperform newer alternatives in specific missions. The Eagle will screeching into combat for decades to come, defending American skies with more capability than ever before. Do you think the Air Force should expand the buy to 400 aircraft, or should they invest those resources in accelerating 6th-generation development? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the technology reshaping modern warfare, and check out the next video where we'll examine the next-generation air dominance program and what comes after the Eagle finally retires.